for coming down to our Canada, the traditional homeland of the Métis people. We have with us 3 honored guests who have come to speak with us. We have 3 people who are running for in the next federal election. To my left, I have Mr. Randy Holbach from the Conservative Party of Canada. To his left, Ms. Estelle Curtis from the Liberal Party of Canada. And to her left, Ms. Harmony Johnson-Harder from the NDP. All right. From this point on, what's going to happen is I have told candidates that they have they have about 10 minutes each, that they're going to be outlining what their party platform is going to be. And after after the specific time period, we will then have Q&A. And what I've instructed your teachers to do was to ask you guys to come up with questions that you may want to ask each of the specific candidates. And with those questions, I wanted to be more candidate directed or party directed rather than an overall generalized question. This way things are a little more easier and everybody gets an opportunity to have an opportunity to speak. All right? So with that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to have Mr. Holbach, our incumbent, speak first.
Cool. Perfect. Well, thank you. And can you hear me okay in the back there? Perfect. That's good to hear. Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me here this morning to speak with you and to listen to you. I'll talk a little bit about our platform. I won't take 10 minutes. If I have 4 or 5 minutes, I think that's great. I'd actually prefer to listen to what you have to say and the questions you have, and I want to make sure we have as much time as possible to receive those questions and answer them. When you look at the Conservative Party of Canada, when you look at what our party platform we're proposing to Canadians, it's about you. It's making sure that government is taking care of your needs and doing things that will benefit you. So in everything we do, the focus is on you and your family and making sure that you have the tools to succeed, your family have the tools to succeed to move forward. And you say, well, how are you going to do that? What are the things that you're looking at? What are the items that are important to you that we're going to address and make it easier for you? Well, first of all, a lot of people are saying it's tough to get by. In fact, there was a report from MMP saying most Canadian families at the end of the month were $200 short or close to being bankrupt. So they're having a hard time paying their bills. They're having a hard time, choosing between pharmacy and food if you're a senior. They're having a hard time paying their utility bills. They're having a hard time finding that extra money so you can play hockey or sports. They're struggling. They feel that they're not receiving the benefits that this great country has to offer them because of that. And we said, well, what can we do as a party to make things better? Well, first of all, respect for taxpayers' dollars. The reality is, any dollar you send to Ottawa, that's your dollar. Any money that's spent by Ottawa, that's your dollar. There's only one taxpayer, and that's you. So how governments handle that money is very important, and the respect that they show to you is how they handle that money. So that's why we feel it's very important that we live within our means, that we make sure we have all the money required to have the health care and the social services that we require, and that we leave as much in your pocket so that you can take advantage of using that money for things that benefit you. So the universal tax cut I'll use for an example. That's $850 that will be left in your family's pockets so that they can use for you. When you look at the GST on heating and HST on heating, and Saskatchewan will be GST, we're going to remove that because we all have to heat our houses. So that savings is left with you and your family to spend as you see fit. We're looking at ways to make more savings for you so that you can spend the money according to what you want and what you require. Now, most families look at it and say, we want our kids to go to university or post-technical school. We want to make sure that they have the funds to do that. So we're going to make that easier too. We're going to increase the government contribution and registered education savings programs. So as your family contributes to those, the government contribution is going to be increased. We're going to look at ways to help make university cheaper and more inexpensive for you. We're looking at ways where we can be more efficient without cutting the special services, the social service that you require. We also say that you have to balance the budget. You cannot go into on and on and on borrowing money from somebody you don't know and then expect you or your kids to pay for it. Because you will pay for it. There will be a day of reckoning, and we felt that day of reckoning in the 90s when we had Paul Martin balancing the budget. He had to balance the budget. He was basically either balance the budget or you'd start losing services like health care, social services. They knew they had to balance the budget then. And we've had good stewardship of our economy since then. And now we're heading back the other way. The last 4 years, the spending has been totally irresponsible. And the benefits have not come back to the Canadians. When you take $300 million and you put it in a Chinese infrastructure bank to build pipelines in China, there's nobody in this room that benefits from that. Nobody. We had a committee in the trade committee that I sat on. We had people from the trade committee. We're asking companies that deal internationally, saying, do you get any of the business or any of the contracts from that work? No. So why would we do that? That's where it comes back to responsible and respect for taxpayers' dollars. And that's what you'll find from the Conservative government. Now, I know a big issue talking in this campaign is climate change. Climate change is happening. Don't let anybody tell you different. Don't let anybody say it's not happening. It is happening. And it's global. You know, Canada represents 1.6% of the emissions. And we need to do our share. We need to meet our requirements, and we need to make sure that we are on track to meet our Paris climate agreements. We have to do that. No question about that. But we have to do more. And the reality is, when we meet our share, when we meet our climate requirements, it does nothing to global emissions. The amount that we cut back to meet our requirements are so small that we're still going to have issues with the climate. We're still going to have warming issues. So what do we have to do? Well, reality is, if we're meeting our conditions by shutting down industries that are more environmentally friendly based here in Canada, so that companies in China and India can emit even more pollution and have even a more drastic impact on your environment, is that right? Does that make sense? Are we actually making the global situation better? No, we're not. We're making it worse. When you've got great Canadian technologies that have been regulated to the highest extent here in Canada, and those companies are being shut down, well, do you think we're still going to go without aluminum? Are we still going to go without steel? Are we still going to go out without these items? No. We just bring it in from somewhere else that doesn't have those requirements, it doesn't have those regulations. So we need to have not just a Canadian plan, we need to be out in the world having a global plan. So when you look at the regulations we have in Canada, when you look at the new technologies that we've developed, I'll use one in Saskatchewan, carbon capture. Coal. You've taken a coal plant that's a dirty emitter, and you've made it now 5 times cleaner than natural gas. So why wouldn't we take that technology to India, to China, and say, hey, here's a way that you can really help the global emission situation by using Saskatchewan technology and sequester that carbon. Yeah, what does this government do? They gave notice to Estevan that they're going to shut down those plants, even though they're 5 times cleaner than natural gas. So what is going to happen when we need more power requirements? Yeah, we'll bring in more solar, more natural gas, or more wind. That's going to happen, but we still need to have the base, and that's going to have to be natural gas or hydro. So we're going to build more hydro dams? We can, but more than likely it's cheaper to build a gas plant. So did we help the global emission situation this day? No, we've made it worse. There's example after example where people have said, let's do a carbon tax. Well, we might feel better because we're paying something. We feel that, okay, we're doing our share, I wrote a check for it. But if you haven't reduced reductions, then you're lying to yourself and you're lying to Canadians. And reality is, when you've got a province like Saskatchewan that says, we've got a plan to meet our emissions requirements without a carbon tax, if I'm sitting there in Ottawa, why would I say, well, okay, great, I don't need a carbon tax. If you can do it without a carbon tax, great, just make sure you do it. And that's what has to be stressed here. You've got to do it. Reality is, it's not happening. We've seen jurisdictions around the world that have tried carbon tax and gone away from it. Australia, France, both 2 countries, both claim to be very environmentally friendly, tried it, didn't work. It wasn't getting the results they wanted. In British Columbia, there's dispute on whether it's working there. You look at the price of fuel in British Columbia, reality is we live in Saskatchewan. I come from Canada, I live in Shelburne. I drive. Now I try to reduce my time on the road, but I still have to drive. I still have to heat my house. I still need parts shipped into Prince Albert that I go and buy if I'm a farmer. All that is subject to a tax that I can't pass on. I have to pay. And did I help the climate situation? No, because I'm unable to reduce my consumption. I can do what I can, and I'll do what I can. So from the Conservative side of things, we looked at it and said, okay, what can we do? Well, part of the big problem is actually our houses. Okay, each of us in this room in our house. So what can we do to make that more environmentally friendly? So we're going to come in with a green energy home plan to help you change your windows, to put in more insulation, to change your siding, to become more energy efficient. That's something that's not only good, but actually lowers your heating bills, and actually in the long run, it saves you money. And it has a direct impact on the environment. There's a variety of things that we're doing in Canada that we need to export around Canada, and I want to make sure we do that. I want to make sure we embrace those technologies. And I think we also got to make sure that other countries do their share. And we got to keep encouraging them, keep showing leadership in the world stage, and we're doing our share. But also saying, hey, you know what? We've got this great technology here in Canada. Why don't you use that here in your country? Why don't you embrace that technology? Because the global situation will be improved if we do that. Now, in the agriculture sector here, I don't want to talk about the importance of export markets. If you're a canola farmer and you've seen the Chinese market shut down, and you've lost $2 a bushel, which is roughly $110 an acre, you know what that means. You have to have a respectable presence on the world stage, and we have not had that. When I was talking to the Japanese ambassador, I was saying, when China does things to you, they're your biggest trading partner, how do you respond? They say measured, but you respond. A measured response. We've done nothing. Italy cuts us off for Durham. What do? Nothing. Saudi Arabia is pulled right out of our markets. Won't even talk to our prime minister. Did we help anybody there by not being able to talk to them? So when you look at what our prime minister's done on the global stage, where Canada was proud, leading by example, not telling people, showing people the right way of doing things, teaching people respecting for other cultures, accepting people for who they are, that's out the window. We don't have that respect in the world stage. And even now it's even worse. So we have to get back to the Canada we love, a respectful Canada, a Canada that lives within its means, a Canada that you're proud to travel from. So when you're in Mexico or you're in South America and you've got that Canadian flag, it actually means something. That's what we need to do. And if you elected a Conservative government under Andrew Scheer, that's what you get. So thank you for your time. I didn't think I'd take 10 minutes, but I did. So I'm sorry if I went on too long.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Curtis.
Thanks, Victor. So, Tansei, bonjour, hello. Before I begin, I just want to acknowledge that we are on Treaty 6 territory in the homeland of Métis. My name is Estelle Jurdis, and I'm running to be your member of parliament. So before I start talking with the platform, I just want to talk a little bit about myself and why I'm running. I believe in giving back to our community and helping build the community, and so as long as I've lived in Prince Albert, I've served on boards, including the library, the YWCA. I've also been a foster parent. I've founded a young professionals group, and I've also taught free dance classes for 5.5 years. And I want to be your member of parliament because I believe that working as part of a re-elected Liberal government is the best way that I can help youth, families, seniors, and our community. So I moved to Prince Albert because I wanted a job where I was actually going to be helping people. And as a lawyer with legal aid, that's exactly what I do every day. So every day I actually talk to people who are going through a difficult period in their lives, and I try to help them. And I've represented thousands of people, and unfortunately, most of them have the same tragic life circumstances, most of which could have been prevented, and that's what leads them to being in the justice system. And that's a huge part of why I'm running now. At the doorsteps across Prince Albert, I often hear from people that crime is a huge concern, and I see how social problems are a main part of that. And I believe that the best way to fight crime is to address the root causes of them. So while I try with my clients to push them towards rehabilitation and do the best that I can to help them, the supports that they need are often not there, and then they end up coming back, becoming repeat clients, and causing problems in the community. So as your member of parliament, I would work for more investments in addressing these social issues. So that'll improve people's lives, reduce crime, and ultimately be more cost effective than putting people in jail. Basically, in simple terms, people who are loved and happy and feel secure don't become addicts and they don't commit crimes. So a little bit about the platform. I'm not going to go into every detail of the platform. I'm going to focus on things that I think are more interesting for young people in particular, but I'm happy to answer any questions about the whole platform. I'm proud to run as a Liberal because we've made so much progress in the last 4 years. We've had major investments in mental health, in anti-gang strategy, in addictions treatment, and our focus overall is on families and affordability. I also know that young people here and around the world are concerned about climate change with things like the Fridays for Future marches that we've seen all over the world. And climate change is real, it is happening, and of course, young people are the ones who are going to see the biggest effects in their lives. Our Liberal plan addresses climate change by putting a price on carbon. We're also increasing protected areas, and we're also making investments to keep communities safer, like doing things like flood mapping and so on, so that we know where the problems are going to be. We have a clear and effective plan to address climate change, and we've done more than any government in Canadian history on that. And if anyone has any questions about the specifics of the plan, I'm very happy to answer them. But just a few examples, we are phasing out coal by 2030. It is the dirtiest source of electricity, and we're going to push for more renewables. we're setting legally binding 5-year targets so that we reach net zero emissions by 2050. That doesn't mean that every sector will have no emissions. It means that we're going to sequester emissions so that overall our target is zero. We're also going to help Canadians retrofit their homes. So we have a plan to help retrofit more than 1.5 million homes so that Canadians can have more energy efficiency. And we're also going to protect land. So we went from a very low number of protected land to now we're at almost 14% of marine and coastal areas and 11% of terrestrial areas that are protected already. And our goal is to reach 25% by 2025 and 30% by 2030. And that's critical towards fighting climate change, is creating and protecting those natural areas that are going to allow us to sequester carbon and have good habitat for wildlife and so on. So I'm going to continue working towards addressing climate change and helping people adapt to it. We also know that we can address climate change and strengthen the economy at the same time, and it is working. Over the last 4 years, Canadians have created more than 1 million new jobs. Most of those are full-time. And so even though we are taking action on climate change, we are still growing our economy even here in Saskatchewan. So switching gears a little bit, I know that education is important for young people. Of course, that's why you're all here today in school. And we've invested significantly in education on reserve, closing the gap in services for between Indigenous youth and non-Indigenous youth. And this is something I'm extremely proud of. You may not all be aware of this, but historically, up until 4 years ago, youth on reserve would receive about 50 to 70% of the funding of what you guys get when you're going to Carlton at what the school receives per student. And so now that is at parity. So every school gets funded the same amount per student across the country. We've also built 13 new schools on First Nations. We're investing in culture and language programs on First Nations and in kindergarten as well for schools on First Nations. So that is very important. We're also investing in education after high school for everyone. So we've increased the amount of student grants already in our government from, it was about $2,000, now it's a little over $3,000 that you can get, and our promise is that that will go up to $4,000. So when you're going to university, that's a grant that you could access to go. We're also going to make student loans lower interest, and we're also going to make it so that when you get a student loan, you don't have to pay it back for 2 years after graduation. Because we know that sometimes it's tough to get that first job, and we don't want you to be saddled paying back student loans when you're not working yet. So you have 2 years, and then after that, you still don't have to pay it back. Right now, we increased it to $25,000 a year, so you don't have to pay back till you make that much. And if re-elected, we'll increase that to $35,000 a year. So basically, until you have a reasonably good job, you don't have to pay it back. And if you decide to start a family, you won't have to pay it back till your youngest kid is 5 years old, and you don't have to pay interest in that time. So that's going to be huge for young people that are going to school and still want to progress with their lives. We're also making training more accessible for workers. So basically, we're preparing you for the kind of world where you're probably not going to have the same job your whole lives, and you're going to switch jobs and you're going to have different kinds of retraining. So we're investing $450 million in the youth employment strategy to help young Canadians gain skills and work experience and job opportunities. So hopefully that will help some of you as you get a little bit older. And we're also making other investments through employment insurance to allow people to go back to work and continue retraining. So I also know that as young people, you're concerned about equality, each other, and people's rights. So for women, we absolutely believe that women have the right to make all decisions about their bodies, and we're going to continue to enforce that. Specifically on LGBTQ2 people, we'll invest in LGBTQ2 organizations so that they can hire staff, expand services, and serve more people. We also know that LGBTQ people face a higher risk of self-harm and suicide, result of bullying and discrimination. And so we have already launched a 24/7 mental health hotline for LGBTQ people specifically, and we're going to continue this investment into the future. We're also going to make criminal code amendments to ban gay conversion therapy, and we're going to end the discriminatory blood donation ban. We've already reduced it down from several years to 3-month suspension, but we're committed to getting rid of that altogether. We're also taking steps to fight discrimination and racism in Canada. And so we're going to address systemic discrimination and unconscious biases and build awareness about the historical roots of racism. And we've already introduced the new anti-racism strategy, and we're going to continue to build on that. Basically, that's going to make sure that everybody, no matter their background, has an equal chance to succeed in Canada. Another thing that I think is important to young people is culture. So from the writers who tell our stories, the comedians that make us laugh, to the artists whose music forms the soundtrack of our lives, we care about culture. And we're proud of that creativity, and I know that youth are very creative, and part of that is arts and all kinds of different things that you can do. And so one of the things we're doing to promote access for youth to culture is creating a culture pass, which is going to be a $200 credit that every youth gets when they turn 12, where they can access theaters, museums, galleries, and so on. And for those of us like us in Prince Albert that maybe aren't as close to some of the bigger museums, we're working on making more of those collections accessible digitally so that you can look at them and still learn from them even if you can't get to those big museums. And then I just want to talk a little bit about the world stage. So we're going to continue our positive commitments on the world stage. We're engaged in global institutions, and I believe that we are seen very positively on the world stage. So we're going to continue to support United Nations peacekeeping efforts like we have been doing, and we're going to continue with a principled approach to foreign policy, where we put democracy, human rights, international law, and environmental protection at the top of our priorities. In terms of specific comments that my friend made about the Asian Infrastructure Bank, that is not money that goes specifically to China. It's money that goes to the Asian Infrastructure Development Bank that helps low-income Asian countries there. And we're also going to continue with other points of foreign aid. Our goal is to meet the requirement to our commitment to have a higher funding of foreign aid by 2030 as we committed the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So I don't want to go on too much longer, but like I said, I'm happy to answer any specific questions that you have. And I believe that having a seat at the table where decisions are made is the best way to help people, and that means bringing Prince Albert's voice to Ottawa and to the Liberal government. So I believe that a better future is always possible. In October, you guys, or at least the electors that are old enough to vote in here, get to choose. So I'm for moving forward for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now we'll move over to Harmony Johnson-Carter.
Yes. Hi. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to come and listen to us. Like Estelle, I'll introduce a little bit about myself and who I am and some of the reasons why I chose to run, and particularly for the NDP. I have a lot of questions about people asking me, where are you from, Harmony? And I can't tell you my hometown. My home community is Central Saskatchewan. My ancestors are Cree and Métis, and my family resides in and around the entire area. I spent some time in St. Louis. I'd love to call that place my hometown. The community is very welcoming and warm. And then I moved to Saskatoon with my parents. My parents had decided to go to university while I was a teenager, and yeah, we lived a very frugal life. When it was my turn to go to university, I couldn't ask my parents for money. And I'm sure some of you in this room could probably feel the same way, and I took out a student loan. The circumstances with student loans were beyond my control, and I couldn't finish my studies. Assistant at the Friendship Center. I lived in La Ronge for 13 years, raised my family, and worked whatever job that was offered to me, and I was open to all opportunities to learn about the community, about individuals, about youth and families, and everyday average families, and to bridge those ideas together and building community. I moved into a community development position for sport, culture, and recreation, and I also work with leadership of communities to help them build their capacity. So through my experience, I have a lot of on-ground experience. I heard a lot of stories from average everyday Canadians and individuals, and I carry those stories with me as I move forward. I chose the NDP I can align my values with the NDP quite closely. Looking to the future, thinking about the future, thinking about youth, and really building and developing community. In Canada, we're talking about how we feel disconnected and fragmented from one another due to technology and the internet. Community is the first and foremost important thing to youth, to our seniors, to our families. If you don't have a healthy community and a community that takes care of one another, we're in for, yeah, we can see the effects of that every day in our own community. So the NDP they're addressing a lot of those issues that we see every day in our community. For students, the NDP are proposing to remove the interest on student loans. The government should not be profiting off of students who are trying to make their lives better. And they'd like to extend the granting programs for students so that it becomes more affordable, and to work with provinces to reduce tuition costs. In the long term, the NDP would like to see access to post-secondary education be accessible to everyone. The NDP has also announced a gang strategy, and that term's not the right term in my eyes. It's addressing youth and what youth are asking for. Youth are asking for more programs and services. Youth are asking for access to do things, to learn more through sport, culture, and recreation. When youth are engaged and are provided meaningful opportunities, they're more likely to give back to the community. Housing. We can see that there's a housing crisis throughout, not just only Prince Albert, but across the nation. And the NDP are also planning to build 500,000 affordable housing units to bring back the 30-year mortgage. And the 30-year mortgage over time reduces the amount of payments that you would make. It makes it more affordable for first-time buyers. Healthcare and pharmacare. We've been talking about pharmacare. The current government has been talking about pharmacare for years. And what pharmacare is free prescriptions, universal access to prescriptions. Not everybody has that access. So it's really working for people who need medications, and it would reduce the amount of strain on our health system and everyday taxpayers' pockets. Families who do have the benefit of having health benefits, that's deducted from their checks. And if we're paying into a tax system that is more affordable, we would see a larger check, and companies would save money because they'd also have to pay into those benefits also. Climate change, we've all talked about climate change, and we all know that it's real. That's a piece that's really important to me. Is reconciliation and Indigenous knowledge is very important for Canada, and building on reconciliation. I had just went to One Arrow not too long ago, and we were talking about the gaps in the education system between First Nations and non-First Nations. And still to this day, One Arrow had shared with me that they're receiving $13,000 per student, whereas the students in Bellevue were getting $22,000 per student. So that gap has not been closed. There's been a lot of talk about action in terms of reconciliation and the calls to the truth and we haven't seen really any action. And those are all my pieces. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Harmony. Unfortunately, this morning we had a candidate who couldn't arrive with us, and she sends her regrets, but what she did send me her one of the things that she wanted me to read to the students, because this is a relatively new party. I'm going to read what she wrote to me. She goes, "Good morning, students. I apologize I cannot be there this morning. I'm glad to see you're taking time out of your class to learn about the political options in Prince Albert for the 2019 election. This is important whether you're voting in this election or if you can't vote until 4 years from now. This is not only about promoting my party, but promoting democracy." Good morning. Her name is Kelly Day. She is a candidate for the People's Party of Canada. She is 33 years old and was born and raised in Estevan, Saskatchewan, worked in natural health. She also ran a YouTube channel doing social and political commentary and is a musician. She lives in Prince Albert with her wonderful new husband and many pets. Politics in Canada today are tense and polarized. How does the PPC fit in all this? Well, we're trying to do politics differently. We are a new party created in September of 2018, the fastest growing political party in Canadian history. Maxime Bernier, an MP in Quebec, bravely left the Conservative Party because of the values informed PPC. It made up of regular people across the country who came from diverse backgrounds but are united in their love for Canada. We created all of our policies with informed main values in mind and tried to live by them. Individual freedom, personal responsibility, fairness, and respect. We'll now go through what they believe are the most relevant policies to your age group. Number one, balancing the budget. This may not be a fun topic for high schoolers, but it is yourselves and your children who will inherit the massive debt Canada is currently in, and so it's important material. A government is responsible for its people. It is their job to use people's tax dollars responsibly. Instead, we see promises, money being thrown around irresponsibly. We see people in our own country suffering, veterans, disabled people, etc. Yet we are spending money on wasteful things. This will eventually lead to more and more taxes with increased housing and tuition costs, plus gas, food, and really want higher taxes in your 20s and beyond. We plan to balance the budget in 2 years, and to do so we don't have to cut any social services. We just need to smarten up. We will end corporate welfare, which means we don't believe the government should bail out big companies. It's not fair to regular business owners and taxpayers. This would cut billions per year. We would also limit our foreign aid. Foreign aid is money that is given abroad for various programs or catastrophes. Canada is a generous carrier of place and will continue to help in humanitarian environmental crisis. However, just as we may take care of ourselves and our families, we can take care of others. Canada must do the same. This is another way to save billions yearly. These are just a few many plans we have, but the important part is we do not have to harm the most vulnerable Canadians to help save our economic future. In fact, one of our policies, abolished supply management, will lessen the average Canadian family's grocery bill by about $400 per year, reducing the cost of eggs, dairy, chicken, and milk. We have a fair tax policy for low-income citizens. We want all Canadians, young Canadians, including Canadians, to succeed. Number two, Aboriginal issues. The PPC is starting a new compassionate, realistic way at looking at First Nations policies. For years, I've watched politicians use First Nations people for photo ops and to pander their votes. We hear flowery, compassionate speeches and promises. We see dramatic tears. Yet in 2019, we have reservations without clean drinking water, among other poor living conditions. We will explore options to replace the Indian Act, which keeps both Aboriginals in a state of dependency to allow the federal government to control most aspects of their lives. We strive to guarantee equal rights and responsibilities to Aboriginal peoples as Canadians and promote the self-reliance and prosperity of their communities. We recognize the federal government's right to approve resource projects, but we also recognize the rights of First Nations to proper consultation and receive benefits and prosper of those projects. The government spends $21 billion yearly on Aboriginal issues, yet evidence shows the lack of improvement in conditions. Our party would review spending to make sure programs are better targeted to benefit First Nations people. We also plan to find ways to promote individual property rights on reserves to empower residents and give them more control over their lives. Maxim Bernier has said that the government treats Aboriginals like children. We want to change that. It does not align with any of the PPC values. Climate change and environment is a big topic in this election. It's important to me because I'm a conservationist, as many of the candidates in the PPC. We have organic farmers, beekeepers, naturopaths, and beyond representing us. I personally suffer from chemical sensitivities and health issues, so this topic is a priority for me. We must be stewards of the land. However, the PPC is very different than other parties. We do not necessarily believe in the climate crisis or climate alarmism. This focus not only in CO2 and climate change, but alongside all other environmental issues in with it. Even though they're often unrelated, this creates a vision where you see people who question the narratives on climate change being shamed or told that they don't care about their grandchildren, etc., which is usually untrue. The PPC does not deny climate change. We recognize that CO2 can contribute to warming. However, we reject the current narrative given by the media and politicians on man-made climate change. Much of this comes from a corrupt United Nations and the media with Hollywood stars or with politicians. There's rarely a mention of counter-arguments, even though there are many studies from acclaimed students from Oxford, MIT, for instance, studies that are never talked about in the news but provide new evidence. Canadians are not always shown in the full picture. The PPC plans to be cautious, not panicking, making emotional knee-jerk reactions. We are realistic about our current needs for fossil fuels and are open to agree initiatives when the technology is ready to meet Canadian needs for heating, transportation, etc. We would abolish the national carbon tax, but it would cost consumers a great deal, despite what the Liberal, NDP, or Green parties would tell you. This is because cost is transparent to the customer, even if you live a green lifestyle. For example, if a shipping company transports organic products to a store or is charged for more gasoline usage because of the carbon tax, they charge more at the store for their services. The store adds that cost onto the product for profits and the customer pays it. Canada is a carbon neutral country with amazing environmental standards. We will let the provinces decide whether they want a carbon tax. We want to focus on clean air, clean water, clean soil, and healthy citizens. We care for this earth. We see a different way forward. And inclusion, as I said earlier, we have several policies on healthcare, free speech, immigration, and more. Please visit her website at kellydate.ca for further information. Bought business cards. I have her business cards here for you to give you, given at the event court, to give you my cell number, phone number, if you have any questions. And if you prefer to talk to someone closer to your age, my main volunteer, Ryan, is 18, would be happy to talk to you. Thank you for listening. I encourage you to read and learn as much as possible. Try to balance your head, be a critical thinker, heart through emotions, and gut through instinct when you vote. I want to warn you that some party will try to take advantage of your good heart or compassion to get your vote. It happened to me. People's Party doesn't believe in trying to suck up to certain groups or votes. We have our values and we stand by them. We hope to share them too, but if not, I won't lie or make false promises to gain your support. Your vote is your voice. Make sure you cast your ballot on October 21st. Bless you all and have a wonderful day. The candidate from the Green Party of Canada unfortunately couldn't make it here today. There are other plans. We'll see what happens from that point on. From this point on, what we would like to do is we would like to have you as students, please raise your hand and ask a question directed at a specific candidate. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to be writing that question down so I can read it so our viewers can hear what the questions are. Do we have a question?
Up right here.
Okay. First of all, are you directing it at one specific candidate?
No, just everybody. Do you have any plans to make it more accessible to disabled people, like disabled youth or something?
So your question is, do you have any plans to make
Everything,
access to various places for the disabled and handicapped?
yeah.
Okay. Do you have plans to make every place accessible to the handicapped? Yes, you may, sir.
Sure. Well, thank you for the question. Just a couple days ago, Andrew Scheer announced the disability tax credit and the leniency that's going to be provided around it. The last few years, it's been actually tightened up so that people that were diabetics, people who used to qualify weren't qualifying anymore. So we go back to the old rules of what it takes to qualify for that tax credit, which allows your family to have the funds to make those changes to your house, to make some of those changes to some of the places that you occupy or you're around. So whether it's your house, your grandparents' house, so that they can make those changes. We also are going to have a green energy home program. Under that green energy home program, that's renovation. So when you're looking at renovations that you can provide to your house, so let's say you're going to provide some things that make it more environmentally friendly, but also while you're doing that, you can make it more disabled friendly and more senior friendly. So you can utilize that fund to do things like that. So you're going to see some stuff like that come forward. And I think with the provincial government, municipal governments, we have to work together to keep striving to do better and acknowledge that there's got to be more done in our public facilities. And I think lots have been done, but more needs to be done to make sure that we've got the access for everybody and they can come and go as they please and attend whatever event they want to attend, that there's no physical barriers. And I think we should take pride, like Taylor Stadium, the new Taylor Stadium, new Rough Rider Stadium, they won an award for focusing on disabilities and making sure that they have the ability to attend rider games. Now I think there's still some things they need to work out and they admit that, but that's a step in the right direction. That means that when you're building new projects, you still have that as part of your focus in your design of the new product or new project. So we're hopefully going to have, we're going to have 2 new arenas and a swimming pool. I'm sure that'll be one of the major lenses for those facilities so that everybody gets to utilize them. And I think that's a positive step forward.
Thank you very much. So,
Thank you. So in terms of what we've already accomplished for people with disabilities, it is pretty significant. I'm not going to go through them all because I have 3 pages of stuff we've done. But I think one of the most important things is we introduced the first ever federal accessibility legislation in Parliament. And so that's the most significant advancement in federal disability legislation in 30 years. So basically what it'll do is proactively identify barriers and then try to remove them in a number of priority areas so that everyone can fully participate in society. So whether that's a physical disability or otherwise. And so budget 2019, the budget that we're working on right now, provided $290 million over 6 years to work on the on support to the Accessible Canada Act. We've also approved nearly 800 accessibility projects, including about 500 paratransit buses and improvements to 81 transit facilities to make them more accessible. We also have an accessible technology program that's co-funding projects to help with assistive devices for people with disabilities. We've also changed the Canadian Survey on Disabilities to allow for better information about disabilities in Canada, and that might seem like it's not that important, but it's like the census. If we don't know what the issues are, we don't actually know how to address them, and that's a core part of government, is actually having that information. We've also committed as the government to hiring at least 5,000 people with disabilities over the next 5 years, and so that would be from this year forward. And we've also provided significant funding to make material accessible for Canadians with print disabilities, and so that for people that are unable to see, and including accessible reading material to be available through public libraries across Canada. And we've also invested $12 million over 3 years to improve employment outcomes for people with intellectual disabilities and on the autism spectrum disorder. And there's another page and a half of things, but I don't want to go into everything in terms of what we're promising beyond what I already said. What we're promising in this budget is to double support for parents who have special needs kids with the child disability benefits. Of course, that's not affecting you guys directly, but it might affect some of your family members or parents, and so that is another significant thing. So hopefully that answers your question.
Thank you very much, Estelle. Harmony?
The NDP platform talks about that will uphold the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities and strengthen the Accessibility Act to cover all federal agencies equally with the power to make and enforce accessibility standards in a timely manner. To help tackle the unacceptable rate of poverty among Canadians living with a disability. We'll launch a full review of income security programs, and when it comes to employment, everyone deserves a fair shot at a good job that fits their unique abilities. A new Democratic government will continue to expand employment programs and to make sure that quality employment opportunities are available to all. For Canadians facing serious illness, we'll make employment insurance work better by extending sick benefits to 50 weeks of coverage and creating a pilot project to allow workers with episodic disabilities to access benefits as they need them. Canadians living with disabilities shouldn't need to worry about the cost of prescription medication or how to find housing or how to get their mail, in addition to putting in place a universal publicly funded national pharmacare program that will offer full benefits to all Canadians. A new Democratic government will restore door-to-door mail delivery for those who lost it under the Conservatives and to create affordable, accessible housing in communities across the country. And finally, we'll work with Canadians living with the autism spectrum disorder to develop and implement a national autism strategy that will coordinate support for research and ensure access to needs-based services and promote employment and help expand housing options.
Thank you very much. Do we have any other questions? Yes.
This is for the Liberal Party. Since the Liberal Party made the carbon tax higher, has there been like a change in how much people spend on it and how much they use it? And has that change been big or small?
Okay, so
Before we do that, I just need to read this out for our listeners.
okay.
So the question asked was, since the Liberals have come into power and introduced the carbon tax, has there been any change on the usage or the spending of any change in usage or spending?
Okay, so the price on carbon, it's not actually a carbon tax, but I'll explain that in a minute, was introduced April 1st. So it's a little early to have data on it right now. It has been successfully introduced in lots of other jurisdictions around the world, including BC, that's had a price on carbon for more than 10 years. And yes, it did successfully reduce consumption. But I'll just explain how the federal system works. So what we have in Canada now is that, unfortunately, under the previous Conservative government, no action was taken on climate change for about 10 years, and so various provinces like BC and Quebec and Ontario moved forward with their own plans, and so as to not make it unfair for places that had already made their own plans, we made what's called a backstop measure. So every province has the option to make their own plan. Unfortunately, Saskatchewan did not choose to make a plan that actually was going to reduce emissions or put a price on carbon, and so that's why the federal backstop, is what it's called, is put into place here. So there's a couple things, but how that works in the way that we see it is there's a price on gas. So it's actually a fuel levy, it's not actually a carbon tax, but it's 4.5 cents a liter. That comes out to $20 per ton. And so it's paid at the distributor level. That's why when your parents are buying gas or you guys are buying gas, you don't actually see carbon tax on your gas bill, but the amount is there and we know how much it is. And basically that's going to go up by the equivalent of $10 a ton per year. So next year it will be 6.6 cents and so on. So the idea behind how it works is that if I'm a rational thinker and I know that this year I have to pay 4.5 cents extra per liter on my fuel, and next year I have to pay 6.5, and that continues to go up, then I'm gonna say, you know what, maybe on my next vehicle, I should be looking at a more fuel efficient vehicle. Or I should be looking at a zero emission vehicle, electric or otherwise, and we're providing substantial incentives to help people do that, including building charging stations and so on across the country, so the infrastructure is there. So in terms of your key question was, have we seen the change yet? We don't know because the data obviously is being collected. It's only since April, so it's been not even 6 months now for that. The other part of the price on carbon, since we're talking about it now, that exists in the federal price is an output-based emissions system on industry. So what that means is in really simple terms, let's say we have 4 factories that are making the same product. And if we look at the emissions, one emission down here, one here, one here, and one here, okay? So what we've actually done is we set the baseline somewhere around this bottom person, and we know that they're able to produce the same product with this level of emissions. So instead of saying you all have to get to no emissions, we said is any emissions over this level, you're gonna pay $20 a ton. So if this person owning this factory says, okay, we can decrease our emissions even more below the level, and they go down here, then they're gonna get a credit of $20 per ton for the emissions they decrease. And everybody way up here, they have a choice. They can either decrease their emissions, maybe talk to their other person in their industry about how they did it, look at that, or they can pay the $20 per ton. That's the option. And so basically it's a financial incentive. So you don't have to do anything. And the Conservative plan is doing regulations, which we know is less effective and costs more. So using an example of that, if I say, let's do a regulation in a term that everyone understands, I know that triple pane windows are more efficient. So a regulation would mean I tell all of you, or your parents more accurately, you have 5 years to change all of your windows to be triple pane. And that costs a lot of money. So maybe $10,000 or more per house. And maybe you don't have that money right now. So that's what a regulation looks like. Says everybody has to do the same thing. When we put a price on carbon, basically it gives us all the options. So I can say, you know what, I'm just gonna keep paying, or I'm gonna add insulation to my attic, or I'm gonna reduce my heating and just wear more sweaters in the winter, or I'm going to use plastic film over the windows. It allows us to come up with our own solutions. So it's what we call a market-based solution. Stimulates innovation, and this is kind of amusing to me, but more than 10 years ago when we started talking about climate change, it was Conservatives like Preston Manning, the former Reform Party leader, that were championing market-based solutions to environmental problems, including climate change with carbon pricing. Preston Manning is still a huge champion of carbon pricing. And then after the Liberals and other people adopted that, then the Conservatives became opposed to it and want to use regulations, which are more expensive. So does that answer your whole question?
Yes.
Awesome.
Are there any other questions? Yes. So the question is, Liberals plan any more increase in taxes with all the plans coming up?
Thank you for the question. So actually, in our very first budget in 2016, we implemented what we call the middle class tax cut. And so for everybody in the middle class, we actually decreased the amount of tax they're paying, and we increased taxes on the 1%. And so most of us are not in that category. In terms of are we going to raise taxes in the future? No. What the plan is for, in our plan going forward, right now when you file taxes, for those of you that had or your parents that do, the first $12,000 that we earn, we don't pay federal income tax on. So for people in the middle class, we're going to increase that amount to $15,000. So you get to earn $15,000 before you have to pay any taxes. So for some of you that are maybe only going to be working part-time jobs or maybe only in the summer, that might be all of the income that you earn, so you wouldn't actually pay any federal taxes. So if you have it taken off your paycheck, you would receive it back as a refund when you file your taxes. In terms of that, that's going to be phased in with the middle income people get the full benefit, and people that make over $200,000 a year then will still have the same exemptions right now. So they're not going to be paying any more than they are, but it's going to be the same $12,000 exemption. So they're not in any worse position than they are right now. Does that answer your question?
Thank you. Okay, but because we only have a limited amount of time, I'm going to ask, does anybody have any questions for Mr. Hoback? Yes.
What is your political stance on the recreational and the medicinal use of marijuana?
So the question asked is, what is your stance on recreational and medicinal use of marijuana?
Good question. Thank you for your question. You know, the legislation has gone through, and I don't think anybody's ever going to turn that back. The only concern I have, and I think we'll have to monitor things going forward, is the implications of the legalization. If we see undesired health effects on people, we might have to put in regulations like we have on alcohol and tobacco that maybe make sure that minors don't use it and things like that. So I think as we see things evolve, there's lots of unknowns. It's like a big experiment. And as science starts to prove that there's issues or maybe issues, well, then we'll have to address those issues at that point in time. But as far as it going back to be criminalized, I don't ever see that day coming.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions in regards to our NDP? Finally, are there any, because the bell's going to go here in the next 5 minutes, do we have any final questions for any of the candidates? Yes.
This is a question to be considered. Do you have plans to prevent discrimination against LGBTQ plus First Nations and women in Canada?
Great question. You know what? Anderson's been very clear about that, yet people keep distorting that. You have every equal right in those communities as any other Canadian, and you should have those rights. And I don't care what your sex orientation is, I don't care what your cultural background is, the country you come from. You're a Canadian. Canadian is a Canadian is a Canadian. There's no question about that. So you have all the rights that every other Canadian has. And if you're being bullied or abused, well, then we need to deal with that. And that's wrong. You know, that's one thing about this country that makes us great. When we travel around the world, a lot of countries look at us and they ask me, say, well, how do you take all these cultures and bring them together and have such a great country? How do they all get along? How do they work together? And I really think it really comes down to respect. We respect each other. We accept our differences. That's fine. And we still work together. We still play together. We still do activities together. I don't care if you're Christian or Muslim. I respect Christmas just like I can respect Ramadan. You know, that's what we need to be, and that's what Canada has been. And that's what we need to put forward on the world stage. That's who we are, and that's what makes us proud Canadians. So I don't like it when we start putting people into silos. That's not right. Let people be who they are. Let's accept them for who they are. Let's work with them because of who they are and move forward. And don't let people tell you that somebody else is something other than them. That's not right. It's wrong.
Thank you very much. For those of you who are listening to us live stream, the question asked was, do you have any plans to assist the LGBTQ First Nations or any other cultural group in Canada? All right. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you all for coming down to listen to the speakers as they talk to you. Before we leave, if you have any questions that you want to talk to one-on-one, please by all means come down and chat with them for a few minutes before they leave, or before you leave. The bell's going to go here probably in about the next couple of minutes. So you do have time to do some one-on-one Q&A with them if you would like. All right? Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Please give a hand for our three speakers.
Folks in my class, just stay here. We'll never make it back for the ballot.
Dale, can you pass me the flyer?
It's like staring right at us. It's probably looking.
Hey, that was good.
Yeah, go ahead, that was the bell. Or you have a question?
Thanks for that question.
My teacher, you can even say my teacher said
Are you going to go in instead?
No, yeah, sometimes it's there. Thanks, Steve. The girl in the back.
Well, okay.
I would have. No one, yeah. And I said that the